and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Sorcerer's Aberrant Mind class specialization from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. The Aberrant Mind brings psionics to the Sorcerer class through the use of an alien influence of some kind. You get to choose what that origin story is and for how your powers were acquired, but if you don't want to take the time to craft your own story behind that, there is a table made available for the use directly within the Aberrant Mind class sheet called Aberrant Origins, and you can just open that up and take a look at the various options that exist. Regardless of how your character acquired their power, your character can now make use of the raw power provided by the multiverse by directly tapping into it through your psionic abilities. Unlike other classes, however, the Sorcerer selects their class specialization at level 1, and it's this class specialization that dictates how your character has the powers they wield. As a result, I'm going to need to quickly set up a level 1 Sorcerer and show you how the subclass selection works while making use of the character wizard, so give me a moment and I will be right back. So I'm about to select the Sorcerer class, and the second I do this, we're going to see our class specialization pop up down here. The one we want to choose is Aberrant Mind. And now I'm going to go ahead, finish off the rest of this particular character's configuration, and I'll be right back. The first feature your character will receive is called the Psionic Spells feature, and it grants your Sorcerer more spells that they will automatically acquire as they level up. These spells do not count against the list of known spells your character can acquire, and can be added to your character's action sheet as soon as the level associated with a given spell is achieved. Additionally, if you are not happy with a given spell that your character has acquired through this feature, you can replace it with another spell at the time your character gains a level, but that spell has to be from the divination or enchantment schools from the Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard's spell list. If you're unsure where to get those spells from, all you have to do is click the Spells button on the right. If it isn't enabled, select the Options button here, go to Sidebar, and then make sure that the Spells button is toggled. Once that's done, click on the Spells button, and then select the source that you wish to choose from. So if you want to choose wizard spells, for example, you can just go down to the wizard field here. If you're looking for a specific level, let's say level 4, then you can narrow the selection even further. But that's as far as that selection goes. There are other options as well, depending on whether you have other modules loaded. You might have some additional selections there, and those are still viable options for you to choose from. Initially, your character will gain the Arms of Hadar, Dissonant Whispers, and Mind Sliver spells, but you will also gain 2 additional spells at levels 3, 5, 7, and 9, all of which can be added to your character's Actions tab immediately after gaining that level. However, we should look at creating a group that sets aside these particular spells from the rest of our spells list. And to do this, I'm going to first drag in this particular spell, Arms of Hadar. I am then going to move this to its own group, called Psionic Spells. Once I do that, I get this new group, but it's not going to be a spell group, it's going to be an abilities group. I want to make sure that I pop open this magnifying glass here and select this particular icon to convert it to a book or spells. Additionally, I want to ensure that my base class or ability here is set. These two will automatically inherit whatever you set here. Now what I can do is drag in Dissonant Whispers and Mind Sliver, and it will automatically get added to that particular group. Although in this case, this is a cantrip. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to ensure that this particular cantrip remained separate from our other cantrips, just so that we know which one came from our feature as opposed to the ones that we get to choose when we create our character. Also at level 1, your character will gain the Telepathic speech feature that allows you to communicate with other creatures that are initially within 30 feet of your character, but can still remain in contact if the two characters, yourself and the other character, are still within an X number of miles equal to your character's charisma modifier. So for example, for this character, that would be +4, so that would be 4 miles. And this is one of the things I don't understand about this feature, is that you initially have to be within 30 feet and be visible to one another at the time that the feature is used. And it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to cover 4 miles in relation to this particular character's charisma stat in the time that the spell lasts, which is equal to your character's level. So in 60 seconds at level 1, unless you're teleporting somewhere or flying really fast, you're not going to be able to get to that distance. Maybe later on at higher levels, but not necessarily at level 1. Now, if your character's at level 20, you can cover an awful lot of distance in 20 minutes, but I still don't think it's going to be the equivalent distance of 4 miles unless using the 2 previous travel methods. The other thing is that if your character dies or chooses to create a telepathic speech connection connected with another creature, this feature is going to drop that connection. However, regardless of that little issue, the only other restriction is that your character and the creature you've chosen must have a language in common for there to be a successful communication between your character and that other creature. And as this is used as a bonus action in the event that your character is in a combat encounter, your character is going to be unable to use any other bonus actions if they have chosen to use this feature during that single turn that you chose to use this feature. And we also don't need to add this to our character's actions tab simply because it's primarily a role-playing feature, so we do not need to worry about it. At both level 3 and 5, you're going to gain 2 additional spells for each of those levels. Now, I've already jumped our character ahead to level 5 so that I can cover both of these in the same section. All you have to do once you've acquired the appropriate level is simply drag and drop those spells into the previously created spell group specific to your psionic spells. And the reason for that is because when you drag these spells into place, it's going to link these spells into a higher level group of the same group. So you can see here that we have our level 2 spells and our level 3 spells that have been added. That guarantees that if you're selecting a spell that isn't from the Sorcerer class when it comes to the various spells that you have available to the Sorcerer, it will automatically set it up so that it links to our Charisma stat for all of its spellcasting capabilities. At Sorcerer level 6, your character is going to gain the Psionic Sorcery feature that allows you to cast a level 1 spell or higher, utilizing either your normal casting methods or through the use of your sorcery points, which will be covered in the base class for the Sorcerer, which I will provide a link in the description below. However, the method I did use in the base video, if it's still an earlier version of my recordings, isn't necessarily the best way to make use of those particular sorcery points from a tracking perspective, because it can get very confusing over time to figure out what uses sorcery points versus what doesn't. So my recommendation is actually to take a spell, say this Chaos Bolt. I'm going to drag in another copy of that spell here. I'm then going to create a new group called Sorcery Points. And that is going to drop down here. And the reason why I'm doing that is I want to ensure that I track the number of sorcery points that my character has. And at 6th level, that's going to be 6 points. So it's going to essentially equal to your character's level. Through that, I can now set up this particular spell to have 6 daily uses. That means that anytime I make use of a spell here, I can now go ahead and actually tick off the appropriate number of sorcery points equal to that spell's level. So for example, this particular spell is a level 1 evocation spell. That means that when I cast this spell using sorcery points, all I have to do is tick off 1 of these actual points here. Now, if I take, for example, Magic Missile, which is also a level 1 spell, and I throw it into this group, and the good news for you is spells can automatically drop into this group. I will, however, set up the base thing to use Charisma just so that it knows. You'll notice here that Magic Missile already has 1 use, even though we haven't used it yet. That's because sorcery points are a total accumulation when you have your group configured this way of the total number of uses per day that you have set here. However, because sorcery points are recovered after a long rest, you need to set this as daily. The other benefit is now when you actually go through and tick off an actual spell because you've used it using sorcery points and you've ticked off the number of points here based on the level of that spell, so level 2 spell would require 2 ticks, for example, you'll know exactly how many points you have left for the remaining use of the day. In this case, we have 1 point left. So if I go ahead and make use of that, now if I go to combat and actions, I won't see my sorcery points anymore because I've used them all. If I go back to standard and I untick some, you will see that they are there. The only issue with this kind of setup is that all of your spells will be in 1 group, and it could be a little bit troublesome trying to find them. But keep in mind they will be alphabetically ordered. So if you know the name of the spell, you just look for it alphabetically and you should be able to find it. Also at Sorcerer level 6, your character will gain the Psychic Defenses feature, which grants your character resistances to psychic damage, as well as gaining advantage on saving throws where a charm or frightening effect is the end result. So we're going to want to ensure we set this up. I'm going to make sure that I drop this into our character's action sheet here, and it's going to create a powers group. I want to call this Aberrant Mind. So we now have the group set up. However, this effect is actually wrong. I want to delete that. Oops, I don't want to create a new one. I want to delete. No, I don't want to do that either. I want to delete that. There we go. I'm having a day today. I then want to add a new effect. And this effect is going to be for our resistance. And it's going to be Psychic Defenses, Resist, Psychic. It's going to be on our own character, and it isn't going to expire because it's a permanent change. We always have that resistance. When it comes to the saving throws associated with being charmed or frightened, there isn't an easy way to deal with this when it comes to effects. In fact, you can't configure one right now to handle those particular conditions. What you can do is simply click this ADV button down here at the bottom. And this is the best way to do it, because if you set up an effect here that gives you advantage on saving throws, you could unintentionally have advantage on a saving throw that isn't associated with a charm or frightening effect. So it's easiest to simply deal with it by clicking on this ADV button down here at the bottom left. Now, if you happen to move this somewhere else, then you'll have to find it wherever you've placed it on your particular screen, because this option is movable here. At levels 7 and 9, which I've already leveled a character up to level 9 so I can handle both of these particular cases, you're going to want to deal with the last bunch of psionic spells that we have gained. And you're simply going to want to expand out one of your psionic spells groups here and drag the appropriate spells onto that particular group so that it will automatically go ahead and create our level 4 and level 5 groups. This ensures that our spells are now set up in a much more controlled method and everything is appropriate linked to the right base stat. At Sorcerer level 14, your character is going to gain access to the Revelation in Flesh feature, which allows your character to expend one or more sorcery points to transform your character into an aberration for roughly 10 minutes. Each sorcery point you choose to spend will allow you to gain one of the benefits listed within the information sheet. So you could theoretically choose to spend all 4 sorcery points and get all of the listed benefits. This includes the ability to see invisible creatures who are within 60 feet of your character and not otherwise blocked by total cover. However, this will change your physical appearance by either giving your character tendrils or completely change your eye color to black so that the entire eye is completely black. And the next benefit is that your character will gain a flying speed equal to your character's walking speed, and you will be able to hover between turns. But this will change your skin into some form of viscous mucus or cause it to shine with an odd light, depending on what you've chosen to use. The next benefit your character could gain is a swimming speed that is equal to your character's walking speed, and the ability to breathe underwater for the entire duration. As a side effect, your character is going to gain gills somewhere near the neck or ear location. In addition, your character is either going to grow webbing between your fingers or strands of cilia that push their way through your clothing. The last benefit allows your character and anything that they are carrying to become a slimy mass that can squeeze through any space that is no narrower than 1 inch, and it will allow your character to expend 5 feet of movement to break free of non-magical restraints or grapples. In all of these cases, you're not really gaining anything that would add to your actions when it comes to the Actions tab. But the only thing that you might have to do is periodically modifying your movement speed. In the case of, say, flying, you might want to double that. But you're also going to want to actually go through and remove that doubling, if you will, when the swimming speed, for example, if you chose that one, returns to normal. But we do need to go through and link this to our particular psionics or sorcery points group, because this does cost sorcery points to use and it has a duration. So we're going to want to still throw an effect on our character. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down to our sorcery points group. And that will link this particular feature in with our sorcery points. So if we've gone ahead and used spells, we will also see that we will only have an X number of points to be able to use for our particular feature. In this particular case, our character is level 14, so I can go ahead and update the number of points we have to 14. Go ahead and get rid of those. Now, we are going to want to add an effect here that's going to have essentially a duration. We don't need to add anything to it. All we have to do is give it a description. In this case, it's called Revelation in Flesh. And this is really just going to be an indicator to us that the feature is essentially still active, if we're happening to use this during a particular combat round. So for example, if I have chosen to use, say, 2 of these particular benefits, so let's say the ability to see and the flying speed, then what I can do is I can now add this effect, which by the way should be on self because it doesn't go anywhere else. I can add this effect to our character and you'll see that it will last 100 rounds when it comes to combat. If you're outside of a combat-based situation, you don't really need to add this effect. You just, essentially, the DM's going to tell you that the effect is coming to an end, or you have to be cognizant of when that effect is going to come to an end. The final feature your character is going to gain is called Warping Implosion, and this happens at Sorcerer level 18. It allows your character to make use of an action to teleport your character to an empty space within 120 feet of your character, and that they can see and is unoccupied. When this happens, the warped space of where your character was standing now explodes, and any creature that is within 30 feet of that location must now make a strength-based saving throw or suffer 3d10 points of force damage. And they are also going to be pulled towards that particular location of where your character was standing before they teleported out. If they make the save, they will only suffer half the amount of damage, and they won't get pulled to that location. But if they failed their save, they will suffer the full amount of that damage, and they will be pulled towards the first unoccupied space that is as close as possible to where your character was originally standing. So if you were standing in the center of the sphere of where that explosion occurred, which is going to happen, and you had 3 creatures that were immediately off to your west, they would all be pulled towards the 3 most adjacent squares associated to that spot next to where your character was standing. It's going to be up to the Dungeon Master as to whether those creatures will get pulled through total cover or not. It depends on how they really want to roleplay that scenario and roleplay that situation, because technically space is getting warped, which means theoretically there could be enough of a gap for those creatures to come through that total cover because of that warping, and then when the warp effect explodes back out, that total cover reasserts itself, if you will, but those creatures have already been pulled through it. This is a single-use feature before your character is going to be required to complete a long rest before they use it again. But if they choose instead to use 5 sorcery points to be able to reuse this feature again, even after they've already used it, they can do so. Keep in mind, though, they're going to only have a limited number of uses of that before they also run out of sorcery points. Once your character completes the long rest, all sorcery points and the use of this particular feature will be recovered. So you're essentially getting 1 free use before you have to start expending your sorcery points. So let's go ahead and set this up on our action sheet. Because we have a free use as well as a sorcery point use, we're going to want to group this into 2 separate groups simultaneously. The first is going to be in the Aberrant Mind group, and we want to ensure that we set it up for 1 daily use. So that free use, if you will, is now set up. Let's go ahead and also link this to our sorcery points. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, make sure that the group is set up for that so it brings it down and we don't have to do anything else. This is now linked to our sorcery points. The only thing I really will want to do is make sure that I pop this open so that this particular saving throw is checked or updated appropriately. And because I haven't already done so, I want to make sure that I set up Charisma in the ability score here for this particular group. That way it will also ensure, even if you already had that set, you can just pop this open, it will make use of the correct stat for this particular saving throw. Now, I'm not going to show a map in this particular case, but just use theater of mind here. Let's say that there's a square approximately 80 feet away from where our character is currently standing that they can see is currently unoccupied and is within visible range, which I've already stated. I'm going to go ahead and use my free use of this. Let's say that Ape 2, 3, 4, the Vampire, and the Mind Flayer are all within 30 feet of where our Sorcerer is currently standing. At the time that I use this particular feature, my character is already moved out to that 80-foot range. Now, those particular creatures that I've just targeted here have to make their save. we have 1, 2, 3 failures, and it looks like we have possibly 2 successes. Good for them. And I'm glad that did that, because here's how this is going to work. You see this H representation here? When I roll the damage for all of these particular creatures, every single one of those creatures that failed is going to take the full brunt of this 3d10 force damage. The 2 that succeeded are only going to take half of that damage. So I'm going to go ahead and click the damage. You will see that it's rolled 3 dice. It has also applied all of that damage to all of the creatures that failed as well as succeeded on this particular saving throw. So you can see here that Ape 3 had a half amount of damage, as did the Mind Flayer. But Ape 2, Ape 4, and the Vampire took full damage. In addition to this, and you'll have to theater of mind this as well, all of those creatures are going to be pulled towards the spot where your character was standing, not where they're currently standing. And they will all come to a stop at the square that is going to be closest to, but is still unoccupied, that location where your character was standing. And the last thing that I would like to point out here, and this comes down to the Fantasy Grounds automation, is that you'll notice that Ape 3 and the Mind Flayer are no longer selected as our target. In case you weren't aware of it, when a creature saves on a saving throw, they will automatically be deselected as a target. If the spell, however, or effect or feature happens to have a half damage component associated with it, they will still suffer that half damage even though they're no longer targeted, and then so it represents that internally, and then it will internally drop that targeting so that you will have to retarget them again in the future if you're going to be able to do something that affects all of those creatures again. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tick off the use of that particular feature, and you will see that it is no longer available to us when we're in our combat action. Now, let's say that I have chosen to use this again, and once again, all of those creatures are around our particular character. So I'm going to retarget the Mind Flayer, and in this case, I'm going to add the Adult White Dragon. Once again, I have chosen to use that effect. And where is it here? There it is. So Warping Implosion. That means that I'm going to tick off 5 sorcery points. Now, granted, at level 18, I have 4 more points here I can add, but I'm not going to worry about that just yet. I am then going to trigger the saving throw. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they all failed in this particular case. That means that all of them will take full damage based on the roll here, and some will die because it exceeded their total number of hit points. However, the Vampire, the Mind Flayer, and the Adult Dragon all still remain intact. Well, wounded, but otherwise intact. I've already ticked off the 5 sorcery points, so if you're low in the sense that you only have 5 points left, while you're in this particular mode, you should make use of the save and the damage before you tick off those points, because this is now going to go away. So let's just, bing, there we go. Now it's gone. In fact, our entire group for sorcery points is gone because we've used all of our sorcery points. And that really brings us to the end of this particular character's abilities that they're going to gain through the subclass. And combining psionics with the sorcerer is an interesting concept because I more or less had considered sorcerers to already behave like a psionicist at a very loose level. But adding the capabilities of what your character will gain as a psionicist and blending that with a sorcerer seriously increases the amount of damage this particular class can throw around. And I'd be interested to see this one in action. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.